Hey, warm and friendly hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peters, and now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you guys. We've got another conference preview podcast for you guys. We're going to be taking a look at the MEAC. It's always a fun conference. We saw Howard actually give Michigan a really nice game in the NCAA tournament last season. We'll see what gems lie ahead for this conference this upcoming season. In segment number 1, I'm going to get you guys the betting trends of what we've all seen here with the MEAC over last year or so, some of the roster moves that we were seeing, the styles of play, the betting trends, and so much more. In the second segment, Herbert Seward, he does great work over at HBCU Hoops Weekly. He does some great work over at Mid-Major Madness and so much more. We're going to break down all 8 rosters with him, take a look at the nooks and crannies of these teams, some of the coaching changes that we've been seeing over the last few years within the conference as well. No massive ones here in the offseason, a little bit more in the swag there, but certainly you've got some adjustments with regards to coaching staffs in terms of assistants, what have you. We're going to be talking with Herbert about that in the second segment, and then in the final segment, I'm going to get you guys my projector or finish for the MEAC. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of 2 ways we will fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, there's the maybe does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Do beg if you, do plead if you, please do send in these Twitter/X questions. So that way I know what you want to hear on this podcast. I can do my best to be able to get you set for what is going to be the greatest college basketball season of all time. And additionally, we're going to be continuing to take a look at all these court cases and any news that I miss over the weekend because I'm doing a conference preview podcast here today. I will polish those up on the podcast tomorrow. But let's get down to business and let's take a look at a MEAC conference that traditionally has lots of teams that play quite up-tempo. With Delaware State, they're a team that is very much an exception to this. 303rd last season in terms of total possessions per game. They love to slow it down, while a lot of these teams, they like to speed it up. Norfolk State is typically a team that's neither here nor there. Last year, they were 167th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. South Carolina State typically likes to go on it. They slowed down a little bit last year to 111th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. And Howard, they were right there in the same boat. They were 113th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Morgan State always loves to move it, 42nd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. NC Central, they're another one of those teams that typically goes a little bit more slowly. Last year especially, they were 282nd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. And Coppin State, well, they just go at the tempo of whatever they feel like. 160th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. I say that because Coppin State inadequate on both offense and on defense. And this was a conference that had some of the worst offenses in all of college basketball. Oh, should be pointed out that Maryland Eastern Shore, also a really slow team in terms of Maryland Eastern Shore, in terms of total possessions per game, 323rd in all of college basketball. And they were 356th in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. You then had at dead last in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, Delaware State. Coppin State, 362nd in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. And then South Carolina State, they were 351st. That is half the conference that is in the bottom 15 in the country in terms of points per possession. Howard, a presentable offense, 188th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Norfolk State, always a well-coached team. Last year was a little bit of a down year for them, but they were still 280th in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Well, it doesn't sound like much, but compared to the rest of this conference, it was pretty solid. As Morgan State, they were 327th in the country in terms of points per possession, and then NC Central, they were checking in at 309th. So there was one team in the conference that was able to avoid the bottom 100 in terms of points per possession. Not a lot of three-point shooting out here in the MEAC as well. You're going to notice that a lot of these teams, they like to go down low. These are teams that they don't want to be messing around with a three-point shot. As a matter of fact, you take a look at highest percentage of field goal attempts that come from two-point range. Delaware State, they were 9th in the country with this regard. So they were very much looking to pound the ball down low, and they were looking to be able to try to get offense generated that way. Maryland Eastern Shore, 57th in the country in terms of percentage of their shots that came from inside the three-point line. NC Central was 67th with this regard. Howard is typically a team that likes to bomb it from three, but even they have become more and more of a team driving it inside. 83rd in the country in terms of percentage of their field goal attempts that came from inside the arc. Morgan State was 92nd. Coppin State was 93rd. And then with Norfolk State, they were 19th in the country in terms of percentage of their field goal attempts that came from inside the three-point line. South Carolina State, by by the way. They were 54th, and South Carolina State was actually a relatively decent three-point shooting team for South Carolina State. They were able to get a little bit of something going from the outside, 173rd in the country with their three-point shooting percentage. Howard was 68th. They were able to shoot 35.8% from three-point range, and then after that, you had a massive fall-off for Coppin State, 326th with regards to their three-point shooting percentage. At the bottom of the conference in terms of just not being able to give you a lot from three, Delaware State, they shot 28.4%. That is 361st in all of college basketball. Maryland Eastern Shore, 354th. They shot 29% from three-point range, so all sorts of rough with this conference. Norfolk State, they were 157th in the country with their three-point shooting percentage at right around 34.2%, so they were relatively solid there. And then for Morgan State, 296th, they were shooting about 31.7% from the outside. Forte of a lot of these teams in the conference, by the way, generating turnovers. A lot of these teams are some of the worst in all of college basketball in terms of taking care of the ball. Morgan State, not necessarily a team that generates a lot of turnovers, 204th in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis, but Howard, they were 13th. 20.1% of opponents' possessions resulted in a turnover. You also had some very demonstrative home and road splits like Maryland Eastern Shore, for example. They were 102nd overall in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis, but if you look at their home games and their home games alone, they were a team that was in the top 15 in the country in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis. NC Central, they were 26th overall, and they found themselves in the top 20 in terms of home turnovers generated on a per possession basis. Delaware State, 32nd, also in the top 20 when specifically looking at their home games. For Coppin State, again, just a team that really couldn't get a whole heck of a lot right. They were 126th in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis. And then with South Carolina State, they were 56th in the country in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis. And it makes it very interesting with regards to totals because you have a little bit of a hodgepodge of different tempos. A lot of teams that just, quite frankly, don't give you a whole heck of a lot on offense. And that led to having quite a few teams going under. Now, Norfolk State, a really good over team. 19 overs and 9 unders. Coppin State, 19 overs, 11 unders. And then Morgan State, 16 overs to 11 unders. Delaware State, 7 overs, 19 unders. And then you had the other 4 teams be relatively just more under teams, but nothing demonstrative. 14 overs and 16 unders for both South Carolina State and Maryland Eastern Shore. NC Central, 13 overs, 15 unders. And then Howard, they had 14 overs to 17 unders. And if you look at Delaware State and how demonstrative that under percentage was, here were the lone teams that were better to the under than Delaware State. Fordham, 22 unders and 7 overs. UT Arlington, 23 overs to 7 overs. So, I mean, it was very demonstrative what we saw with regards to these teams, and with regards to the MEAC, it's a very clear divide between the haves and the have-nots, and Howard, they were one of the best cover teams in all of college basketball. They were the representative in the NCAA tournament last year, 22-8-1 against the spread. As a matter of fact, they were your most profitable team in all of college basketball last year. From there, you had Morgan State be 14-12-1 against the spread, 15-13 against the spread for NC Central. Maryland Eastern Shore was 15-15. Delaware State was 9-17 against the spread. Coppin State 13-17 against the spread. South Carolina State 13-16-1 against the spread. And then for Norfolk State, they went 13-15 against the spread. If you look at how favorites did within the conference, obviously Howard was very good in the role of a favorite, 15-6 against the spread. But most of these teams, other than Maryland Eastern Shore, they were 2-8 against the spread as a favorite. Relatively solid. Morgan State 4-1-1 against the spread as a favorite, and then Norfolk State, South Carolina State, NC Central, they were all 50-50 against the spread as a favorite. Coppin State was 0-1. Again, you had a sample size of 1 there, so that's not doing a ton for you. You don't have a ton of travel with this conference as well, so not really big, shall we say, splits between home and road teams. Howard was great against the spread at home, 7-3-1 against the spread. Morgan State, 7-4-1 against the spread at home. South Carolina State, 5-4, and then you had 4-4 against the spread at home for Maryland Eastern Shore. 4-5 for Delaware State, 4-6 for Norfolk State, 3-6 for NC Central, and then Coppin State bringing up the rear, 2-6 against the spread. And then if you look at the road games, you did see quite a few of these teams who were relatively solid, aside from Delaware State, who went 4-11 against the spread away from home. South Carolina State, 8-11-1. Coppin State, 9-10 against the spread away from home. 10-10 for Maryland Eastern Shore, 7-7 for Morgan State, and then 9-4 for Howard. 9-7 for NC Central. Norfolk State, 8-7 against the spread at home. So it's very interesting to be able to take a look at that element of things. And if you just look at the non-conference games for a lot of these MEAC teams, they actually made you maybe a little bit of money if you pick the right teams. Coppin State was 6-2 6-10 against the spread outside the conference. South Carolina State was 5-9, but then Morgan State 5-7, Norfolk State 6-7, Delaware State at 5-5, 6-5 for NC Central, and then Maryland Eastern Shore 10-5 against the spread in non-conference games because they caught a lot of points. They played really slow, and then now we're 10-4-1 against the spread in non-conference play. So that's a little bit of the betting trends that we've got and styles of play of the MEAC. And coming in next, let's talk about all 8 of these rosters with our good friend Herbert Seward, who does great work over at HBCU Weekly, Mid-Major Madness, and so much more right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast, the MEAC Conference Preview Edition. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It's the MEAC Conference Preview Edition, and it's great to have this man aboard as Herbert Seward. He does a great job taking a look at all things HBCU sports, whether that be football or basketball. He's at HBCU Hoops Weekly. I know he's done a little bit of work with places like Fansided, perhaps a little bit over at Mid-Major Madness as well, taking a look at things like the MEAC, the SWAC. He is such a master in terms of taking a look at all that and so much more, and he's dialed into everything that we're getting here in the offseason. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at HBCUHW altogether. That's for HBCU Hoops Weekly. And Herbert, great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Absolutely, man. And thank you for that introduction, man. That's extremely flattering. I really appreciate it. Like I said, it's the off season. And, I think, for the MEAC in particular, I think you're going to see a little bit more movement in terms of how rosters are going to play out picture wise, the closer to that we get to October. But yeah, I'm with you, man. I'm excited.
I am as well, and I think it's going to be interesting for these guys because it looks like Compensate is going to be able to retain quite a few of their own. It's been rough ever since they let go of Juan Dixon a few years ago, but it's looking like they're going to be bringing back some of these guys like Cam Sparrow, Hussein Williams. These were guys that contributed a lot last year. Very much a wholes greater than the sum of its parts team, as they really haven't added alpha dog score in a few seasons, but want to get your thoughts on them because I think that bringing back someone like Tyler Koenig is going to help them out down low, and I don't think Compensate is going to be challenging Howard or anything like that, but I really like the fact that they were able to maintain some of their own, and it feels like they're taking some strides forward.
Yeah, it's huge, to be quite honest with you. I think the big thing that Turquin, Namot, Larry Stewart, and that staff needed to do was to kind of reestablish the culture there. Anybody that's familiar with those guys, those guys were from an era of basketball, Fang Mitchell and that program where, they were pretty much running the MEAC and going to NCAA tournaments every year. I think having those guys back on board to kind of reinstill that pride in that program. Year one was, admittedly rough. I think the retention that they got and some of the transfers that they got in, they're definitely going to be competitive. It's going to be interesting to see exactly, how some of these pieces play out. I know Favorite Air, center at Bryant, 6'11", 220, redshirt senior, he was there. Anybody familiar with the DC Metro basketball scene, that dude was highly sought after by a lot of people, including the University of Maryland, a whole bunch of SEC and ACC schools. So him being in the fold there, Coppin, is going to be really interesting to see how it plays out. Brendan Johnson, I think you mentioned it before, 6'4", 6'4" redshirt sophomore. He's transferring in from Merrimack. I mean, I think he's going to really be an important piece for them in terms of just developing the type of rotation that Larry Stewart and that staff want to see in terms of the fluidity and the flexibility, in terms of being able to play in that conference. So I'm looking forward to see exactly how those pieces fit. But yeah, I think, Tyler Koenig, I think he's going to be a good piece because, as a forward, he showed glimpses of it last year, in terms of what he could do offensively, the versatility he exhibited in conference play. He could score effectively at pretty much all three levels as a forward. Mind you, I think the time that he got to play was really limited due to the starters being there. But I'm looking for improvement. Again, I don't think, like you said, I don't think these guys are going to be competing for MEAC titles, but I think they're going to be a lot more competitive than what they were last year.
Yep, no question about it. When you bring back that much of a core, I think that that's big, especially at the mid-major level. So I absolutely love to see that. And it was an interesting year for these guys last year because Maryland Eastern Shore was really competitive outside the conference. A lot of people forget they played a double overtime game against Longwood. They played a double overtime game against Georgia Tech. They were really good in terms of generating turnovers. Been the case for them for the last few years. They've had a tough time in terms of their offense, but I'm excited for Sadiq Moore is going to be coming over from Weber State. I've been seeing some reports of someone like an Amadi Endai perhaps being able to get into the mix as well. They seem to be bringing in some size. The 7'1" big man in Elson, I'm going to get this last name incorrect, Bathanu, hopefully I get that correct. He should be coming in from the non-D1 ranks as well. So for Maryland Eastern Shore, have some question marks with the backcourt play, but seems like they beefed up down low this offseason.
To be quite honest with you, I'm really looking forward to seeing who Cleo Hill brings in, to fill those guard spots, because as you mentioned last year, they bought into how, Cleo's, teams play. I know if you're familiar with what he's done, what he did at Winston-Salem State and at the D2 level, his kids play hard, and he doesn't lose a lot of games at all. Defensively, they kind of hung their hat on it. They got better defensively as the year went on. I'm really interested in seeing, again, who he brings in to kind of replace the scoring punch they had in the guard slots. Because I think, front court wise with his defensive philosophy in terms of how they like to protect the paint, limit penetration into the lanes, they're going to have a real chance to really, move up the echelon a little bit if they can get really good guard play. And I think, this last stretch of portal and recruiting going into the preseason is going to be really important for him. I'm really interested in seeing how that plays out.
Yep, there's a little bit of TBD with them and a few others because when it comes to the low/mid majors, some of them don't unleash as much as what they have. Sometimes they keep some trade secrets, things like that. So could be interesting with Maryland Eastern Shore, but we do know that they beefed up a little bit down low. And for NC Central, I think it's interesting as well because for NC Central, they had a pretty nice backcourt last season. Needed to do more on the defensive glass. They were allowing about 38% of opponents' missed shots to become an offensive rebound, but Jozan Price, he's a 6'10" big man. He comes in after at the non-Division I level. He was shooting about 39% from three. Great versatility there. We just talked about Maryland Eastern Shore. They bring in Trey Brown from there. And then I love the fact that they pick up Christian Meeks. Right now, a few question marks with the backcourt. They're going to be losing so many of those guards, but very clear that NC Central knew they had some problems down low, and they addressed them in the offseason.
No, I'm not as concerned about the guard play with North Carolina Central. Typically, late in the recruiting and transfer portal cycle, Coach Moten lands gems. It never fails. It happens every year where, they're lacking and they're coming down to the gun in terms of, getting people to fill slots in the, the guard slots. And he lands a transfer that ends up really being a focal point, being a real piece for him. So I'm not as concerned about that part. I think he addressed what he needed to address, quite honestly, in terms of the block, because they got killed a lot on the glass and rebounding. Both offensive, defensive rebounding was a real problem for him last year. And I think he did a good job in addressing that. Again, how, the pieces fit is going to be really determined in terms of how, what he fills out in the last stretch of this, of this offseason cycle. And though there's some targets that he's in the mix with, I'm not going to go on record and say right away because it's not quite clear exactly, where they stand. But these are some Big East and ACC caliber transfer talents that he's in the mix with. That says a lot in terms of, the reputation that Coach Moten has. So I think ultimately, before the season starts, I think they're going to be in the mix. I think they're going to be in the mix to be a dark horse for MEAC in terms of the regular season title. Again, so much is really hinging on how they do in the last third of this offseason cycle in terms of what late, wins they can pick up recruiting wise. So I'm really looking forward to seeing, how that plays out.
Yep, I am as well, because with NC Central, very clear that they're going to be proved down low. Question marks with the guard play, but I mean, if you go back for Lavelle Moten, you can go all the way back to when he was coaching in the AAU days for John Wall. Clearly has some connections over there. One of the most well-respected HBCU coaches out there. As we do have our good friend Herbert Seward joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops for the MEAC Conference Preview Edition, and I think this team is going to be interesting. For South Carolina State, they were one of the better three-point shooting teams in the conference last year, and if I'm not mistaken, I was seeing Deshaun Jackson on the roster. He was good at Mercier. 6 points, 3 boards, 3 assists, maybe a master of none, but does a lot of things really well. Christopher Parker was a guy that last year flourished a little bit with about 7 points, 4.8 rebounds per game, and it feels like they've got quite a bit of retention, and if they can get back Noah Treadwell, which I think that he should be back for this team, I think that he's a nice building block to be able to build around in the backcourt.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, man. Every time I look at South Carolina State roster-wise before the season, nobody immediately stands out, and that scares me because essentially, Coach Martin has made it an art form to take those pieces and make those pieces greater than the sum of their parts. Ever since he's been there, that team has been, ultra disruptive defensively. They turn you over, they get out in transition, and they have a lot of interchangeable pieces, particularly from spots 2 through 6, 2 through 5 rather, excuse me, where they can do a lot of things defensively in both half court and transition situations. So I'm really intrigued by some of the pieces that they have. Again, they've exhibited some of the same types of vulnerabilities that squads like Central have in terms of not having enough depth along the block, particularly spots form where you get them in a half court situation and you really have a size advantage. They can be really exploited that way. I'm really looking forward to seeing what Coach Martin brings in recruiting wise. Again, this is I hate to be a broken record, but this is one of those situations where the last leg of the recruiting cycle and the portal cycle is going to be paramount, particularly with the way, the style of play he's instituted there. They can be as disruptive as anybody in the conference. And the way they play, really keeps them in contention. I know his first and second year there, they were quite literally on the cusp of, making a run at late regular season, through the tournament and, trying to get it, NCAA tournament bid. So, I'm looking forward to seeing how they.
I am as well, because, I was concerned a few years ago when they lost Madlock Squared, as I like to call it, that it was going to be a big drop-off, but Coach Martin has been able to do an amazing job over there, so I'm right there with you on them. And then I feel like these guys took a massive stride forward last year. That would be Morgan State. They did a really good job in terms of guarding the three-point line. Going to be losing a few guys. Mentioned Christian Meeks, who's going to be over there at NC Central this season, but hey, you bring in Abrima Traore. He was over at Utah last season, and Trey Pettigrew. This is a guy that was at Nevada and Eastern Michigan. He's a former top 250 recruit, absolutely tore it up at the NAIA level for Johnson C. Smith at the JUCO ranks, 17.5 point per game scorer. They bring in Keith Richard as well. They lose so much of that good backcourt, but Trent Edwards is a guy that is going to be retained. He's got some upside after being limited due to injury last year, and Morgan State, I think, has done a really good job hitting the portal and bringing in some big impact pieces.
Yeah, I'm gonna be quite honest with you. This is my dark horse as I look, at the roster additions. And Morgan did a really good job of rating the D2 ranks, particularly the CIAA, with some of the Johnson C. Smith transfers you mentioned coming in. There's one kid in particular, though, sophomore by the name of Oliver Spence, who's at UDC. Dude is a, Belgian import, European player, one of the best big, traditional back to the basket big men at the D2 level last year, playing for UDC. To me, I know he's not being mentioned much because of some of the other names there, but that dude is as good of a post player, traditional post player, as I've seen, at the D2 level in a minute. So the fact that he, Coach Bros was actually able to land him, because he had some other folks. I know Sacramento State was after him. There were a couple of, Missouri Valley Conference mid-majors that were after him. I know Tennessee State, Nolan Smith had extended, feelers to see whether or not he can recruit him or not. I'm looking forward to seeing exactly, how he can be implemented in that front line. Because that front line, just looking at that and knowing who else they've brought in, that's arguably the deepest one in the conference. Just looking at it on the roster right now, and that can go a long way. And, admittedly, I think this is kind of a do or die year for Coach Broadus in terms of getting the talent that he's gotten and making it work toward a MEAC title, either regular season or run to the tournament. So I'm excited, to be quite honest, to see this roster, man. He's been, Coach Broders has been on the cusp, and I'm ready to see what he does, with the top three.
Yep, I'm right there with you. It was a nice breakout year for them last year. We'll see if they're able to take that next step forward this year, but I've been loving what I've been seeing out of them. And then this team I think is intriguing because Delaware State was able to play some good defense last year. Top 35 team in the country in turnovers forced on a per possession basis. Very clear that they need to address the offense. The Cayman Shell situation, he was one of the guys involved in the gambling scandal. That certainly did not help out Delaware State, to say the least, so they're trying to rebuild from that. Adamar Santos should be back from last year after averaging about 7 points per game. And then they add in there some intriguing pieces like a Trey Hawkins, who was over at Miami of Ohio. We remember what they did last year. Jalen St. Clair should be back as well. And then the guy that I really started, Isaiah Sullivan. This guy at Division II Bridgeport was putting in their 17 points per game for Delaware State. Very clear that they need to address the offense, but defense was rock solid enough to be towards the top of the conference last year.
Yeah, I think that's going to be what Coach Waterman's going to hang his hat on. There's one other kid that could have been back in the fold, but that wasn't, ended up transferring out. That's Ponce James. He's going to be a really hard piece to replace offensively. I think ultimately, though, I think it's going to be very interesting to see again, to see how Delaware State handles the last leg of this recruiting window. Where Del State is situated at, Coach Waterman has really made an inroads into Philly and some of those other places that in the Delmarva area. So I want to see exactly how he can do that in regards to this year's squad. Some of the pieces are there, but I think Delaware State's window, or ceiling rather, is about as high or as low, as anybody else in the conference. It's just really going to depend on what pieces he can place at the same time, at the prime time, before the window ends. Again, from a coaching standpoint, Coach Waterman's staff, I've said this a lot last year during, our podcast and stuff, where MEAC is one of the underrated coaching gems in all of low mid-major basketball. Well, all of mid-major basketball, so just about all the coaches there are really, really, really solid. And, they do more with less than just about anybody else in the country. So, again, it's going to be interesting to see how this roster situation at Del State plays out.
Yep, I'm intrigued as well, because with Delaware State, if they can just find a little bit more offense, feels like they're going to be on the cusp of something. As Herbert Seward, he does such great work taking a look at HBCU basketball over at HBCU Hoops Weekly. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and this is a team that's always towards the top of the conference. They've made a lot of NCAA tournaments over the last few years. That'd be Norfolk State. No question about it. Going to be losing a lot from last year. These guys like Elijah Jameson and company, but hey, it seems like everyone's getting a fifth year of eligibility, so maybe one or two of those guys will be back. But what we do know is that they're bringing in Ja'Kai Gupton from St. Peter's. He was a rock-solid player that had about 8 points, 5 boards, and a steal per game. Brandon Gardner should be able to help out this team. He comes over from I believe it's Sacramento State, and then J.C. Riley from Northwestern State. These guys are solid. They bring in some of those guys that maybe they didn't have a ton last year. Ahmad Torrance, Draman Kamara. But I noticed at Norfolk State, they always do a great job of being able to help these guys out. And then they had a lot of injuries with those two guys as well. I think that for Norfolk State, even though they lose a lot of that backcourt, they're still going to be towards the top of the conference, because I just trust in this system.
Honestly, man, I think it's going to be Norfolk and team that we have to talk about next, which is Howard. I personally think they're head and shoulders above everybody else in the conference, just on paper. Norfolk is loaded. I think there's one young man we haven't really mentioned yet and that's a 4-star recruit that Coach Jones landed, Jordan Skyers from Putnam Science Academy. 6'3" freshman combo guard. Dude was lights out when he was a high school player. Again, it's one of those situations where Norfolk beats out some of the, in-state powers that from Power 5 conferences that were after this kid. Temple was after him. He could have stayed in Philly, in the New York area, and he ends up, at Norfolk State. And that's a testament to, to the visibility of that program and what Coach Jones has been doing there. One of the things that has always struck me about Norfolk State's program is just, Coach Jones and that staff's ability to take pieces and to really form them into really cohesive units. Some years have been more talented than others, I think this is one of those years where the talent is going to be there in addition to the system. I know we're talking about, returners. Anthony McComb III. I think he's a preseason player of the year candidate in the MEAC. Dude is going to be he's going to be ridiculous for them. And I think they're going to have, one of the top two backcourt rotations in the conference. It's really going to be cool to see these guys make a run, see whether they defend their title or not. Yeah, man, I'm excited to see, this edition of Spartan.
Yep, I am as well. For Norfolk State, you always know that you're going to get something good out of them. That coaching staff in general, in my opinion, is just one of the most underrated ones in all of college basketball. We see these guys always be a lance of good recruits, and they always do a lot with them. Robert Jones, I trust, so I think that it's going to be a solid year for them. And then when I take a look at these guys, I think that it's going to be a fascinating season when it comes to what we're going to be able to get out of them as well, because you've got a team here in Howard that they're just absolutely locked and loaded. I wish I could put it any other way, but with this Howard team, we saw them actually give Michigan a better game in the NCAA tournament than Arizona did. I'm not even kidding when I say that.
No comment. No comment, man. That was ridiculous.
Yeah, Arizona couldn't hang in there for a half. Howard did. They lose Bryce Harris,
yeah.
But to your point, you have Norfolk State and Howard head and shoulders as the top two. I personally think that is Howard and everyone else, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest with you, man. Like I said, you look at Howard's roster, the returners. There are three names actually that immediately stand out. Cam Gillis returns as point guard. In my opinion, he's one of the real game changers for Howard last year in their run to get to the tournament. Probably the biggest piece in my eyes, the return is Cedric Taylor III. If anybody familiar with who Cedric Taylor was, he's a transfer in from Division II Morehouse a year and a half before. Dude hit the ground running and never looked back. One of the best two-way players in all of mid-major basketball last year, and one of the best total packages in the MEAC in terms of total play. I expect him to really blossom. The reality is that we looked at Howard's roster. A lot of that core is back. The Croatian kids are back. Stephanie Isalovic. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. He's back. You got BJ Powell. He's back. Ed Holland III is returned, although I'm not sure what his status is in terms of playing. And there's one really big addition that people haven't been talking about. Howard lands, North Carolina transfer James Brown. And I think anybody that's familiar with Brown's story, he was really highly recruited, by the Tar Heels, got there, obviously didn't get a chance to get a lot of run. Again, he got into the portal last year and big schools after him, and he ends up at Howard. And he can be a legitimate game changer as an inside prospect in this conference. He could disrupt shots. His length and size are going to really give Coach Blakeney a real degree of flexibility just to erase mistakes before they even get to the rim. I'm really excited to see the progression of this program. The reality is, between Coach Blakeney, Robert Jones, Coach Martin, Coach Moten, again, this is one of the best pound for pound coaching rosters in mid-major basketball. Folks don't, really look at some of the low mid-majors like MEAC or the SWAC. Honestly, some of these programs are up against the 8 ball. They might have to travel a whole lot away from home. But, the coaching job that they do is incredible. And it's something that should be celebrated.
Yep, it certainly is on this podcast, because for those that were taking a look at the MEAC last year, your number one most profitable team in all of college basketball last year, the Howard Bison. So trust me, this podcast absolutely loves Howard. We absolutely love getting you aboard, Herbert. You do such an amazing job taking a look at all these HBCUs, whether it's the MEAC, the SWAC, when you go down to the CIAA and the Division II ranks, you do such a great job there. So let the good people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Absolutely, man. First, HBCU Hoops Weekly, the podcast, is part of the overall podcast network, the HBCU Nightly Network. We took a brief hiatus this past season. We're going to be back in full force for 2026, 2027 season. So look for that. On social medias, I could be followed on X at HBCUHW, hashtag HBCUHW. That's HBCU Hoops Weekly. And the HBCU Hoops Weekly website portal, check that out. We're keeping up with all the movements of the portal as fast as we possibly can. So I know I'm doing the manual updates now for the site, so keep your eyes peeled for for HBCHoopsWeekly.com in the coming weeks. We're going to our best to have all the updated roster information for both the SWAC and the MEAC, the Division II and NAIA ranks as well. So yeah, man, thank you again for having me on. This has been, every year I look forward to these because it's a platform where we get a chance to talk about, what a gym, being able to check basketball on these two conferences is. So I'm really appreciative of it.
And we appreciate you, Herbert, because on this podcast, it doesn't matter if it's the ACC, if it's the Big Ten, if it's the MEAC, if it's the Ohio Valley Conference. You've got games, you've got money to be able to be made, and it doesn't matter if it's out there in a gym where there's 5 billion people, or if you're in a little bit more of an intimate setting, you're able to make some money, you're able to have some fun watching hoops, and Howard last year, man, that team was an absolute bulldozer. So we'll see if they can do that again, and Herbert, every single time he joins me, lends such great insights. So big thanks, Herbert, for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VC Family Podcast. Up next, I get you my projector or finish for the MEAC. Here, lovely Las Vegas, for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VC Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by Herbert Seward. He does such great work over at HBCU Weekly. He does a nice job taking a look at all things MEAC, SWAC, HBCU over at Fansided, Mid-Major Madness, and so much more. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights. Did so once again today. So a big thanks to our guy, Herbert, for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast to give you my projector or finish for the MEAC. Again, because I am doing a conference preview today, anything that I might have missed over the weekend with regards to news and notes in college basketball, I will be polishing those up tomorrow, so have no fear there. We want to give as much sparkle and shine to these conference previews as humanly possible, and that way, if you're listening to this in August, September, October, you're getting good, clean, evergreen information to be able to get you set for what I hope to be the most great and amazing college basketball season of all time. So how about if we do get things started with my projector or finish, and at number 8 in my projector or finish for the MEAC, I go with Maryland Eastern Shore. Unfortunately for the Shore, they actually had some halfway decent backcourt play last year. At home, they were a top 15 team in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis. Cleo Hill seemed to find some upward momentum. Now the team just got absolutely lambasted on the glass last year, and they weren't able to get to the free throw line whatsoever. But when you lose Zion Obinla, hopefully I got that correct, Joseph Lusardo, guys like this, Dorian Staples, that just really hurts for a team that didn't have a lot of size. Christopher Flippin was pretty flippin' good last season. He's out of the fold. You're going to be looking to Lucius Gibson Savadell. He's going to be trying to help this team out a little bit. I think that they've got a transfer or two that's coming in from Pittsburgh as well with a little bit of size. At last check, I was seeing Amadi Endai on the roster, but hey man, you don't have a lot of size. They didn't have a lot of three-point shooting last year. Sadiq Moore is a guy that was seldom used over at Weber State. He should be able to give the team a little bit of a boost out there in the backcourt, but a team that was very reliant upon turnovers. They don't have that, shall we say, camaraderie back from a season ago. I think that it's going to be very much an uphill battle for Maryland Eastern Shore. As a result, number 8 in my projector or finish for the MEAC, I'm going to be going with Maryland Eastern Shore. And number 7 in my projector or finish for the MEAC, I go with Coppin State. Coppin State actually brings back guys from last year. Like Cameron Sparrow is back after he had 5.5 points, 4 boards per contest, shot 35.5% from 3. Hussein Williams, 7.5 points per game. Jamari Piercy, he gives you a bit of something. Tyler Koenig, he's a guy that is like 6'9"-ish. He should be able to help you out a little bit. Nelson Laminza, hopefully I got that correct. He comes over from Merrimack after he was on their bench. So they're starting to build a little bit of something. Like Coppin State has been one of the worst teams in all of college basketball the last few years, having a lot of chemistry from last year. I don't know if that's going to take them to the promised land here or anything like that. For Larry Stewart, it's been a little bit of an uphill battle for his team, but at the very least, it does feel like they're starting to build a little bit of upward momentum. They had 2 wins a few seasons ago. They've went from 2 wins to 6 to 7 under Larry Stewart. I think that they could take another little bit of a stride forward. Again, even though you bring back guys from last year, I don't think they were very good to start with. You really didn't have anyone other than Demetri Hall from last season that was averaging double figures, and he's out of the fold, and still don't have a lot of size with this team. So still an uphill battle for Coppin State, but I think there's improvement here. With Coppin State, I've got them in my projector finish for the MEAC at number 7. Number 6, I go with Delaware State. Delaware State, a top 35 team in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis. Now they were still a rough team with their defense, and out of 365 Division I teams, 365th in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Man, that is not great to say the least, and they do lose some of those, shall we say, more big men from a season ago. Ademir Santos is a guy that they're going to be looking to be able to help elevate this team a little bit. They have yet to even post a roster for the 2026-27 season up on their website, so that's rough. I mean, Santos was able to give you 7 points per game. Trey Hawkins is a guy that should be coming in. He didn't see any time over at Miami of Ohio, but they're going to be looking to him. They're going to try to get back Zion Bethea, who's been in college basketball since, I think, dinosaurs roamed the earth. Whether or not he gets eligibility, who knows, but I mean, everyone's getting eligibility right now in college basketball, so why not have Zion Bethea back for another season? Jalen St. Clair, he was a guy that was able to average about 3.5 points per game, and then Isaiah Sullivan. He comes in from Division II Bridgeport. He was able to average 17 points, 4 rebounds per game. He's really the X factor here for Delaware State. Delaware State honestly has some solid defense. They just need to find any sort of a lick of offense whatsoever. So with Delaware State in my projector finish for the MEAC, I've got them here at number 6. Number 5 in my projector finish for the MEAC, I'm going to be going with NC Central. Now, you've got, in my opinion, one of the more well-respected mid-major coaches in all of college basketball. We all know what you could expect out of Lavelle Moton, but right now they just haven't brought in a lot of guys via the transfer portal. Like, they're going to be looking to so many of these guys that were playing at the non-Division I level last year. It's not even funny. They do bring in Christian Meeks, who is a solid, 5 rebound per game guy over at Morgan State after this team, year in and year out, just got destroyed on the glass, and that's a big reason why we've seen them fall off of there in the MEAC over the last few seasons. For NC Central, as a matter of fact, 364th out of 365 Division I teams in terms of defensive rebound percentage. Opponents rebounded 38.1% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound. That's just simply unacceptable. You've got Josan Pierce, who had 6'8", 8 points, 4.5 rebounds per game on 39% three-point shooting at the lower non-Division I ranks. Trey Brown is a guy that comes in from Maryland Eastern Shore, but at Maryland Eastern Shore, who in my projector finish, I had them 8th. He was averaging 3.5 points per game for them last season, so that's going to be rough. Isaiah Buckley, he comes in after over at Shaw University, another great HBCU, 14.5 points, 4.5 assists per contest. That's going to be I'll help out, but unless if there's something that I am missing because they haven't released a roster yet, it's looking like they're going to be relying upon a bunch of non-Division I guys to be able to figure it out. I trust in Lavelle Moton to not be in the cellar of this conference, but I have to have NC Central sort of sight unseen. Here my projector finish at number 5. At number 4, my projector finish, I'm going to be going with Morgan State. Morgan State took some nice strides forward towards the beginning part of conference play last year. Now, it did toilet bowl a little bit late, and you are going to be losing a few guys from a season ago, like a guy like Tristan Meeks was relatively solid last year, and Rob Loss and Alfred Worrell. That was a really good 1-2 punch in the backcourt last year. Those two guys combined for 30-plus points per contest, and Morgan State figured out how to be able to guard the three-point line. They were a top 50 team in terms of opponent's three-point shooting percentage. Abrima Traore, hopefully I got that name correct, 6'9" big man. He comes in after he really didn't get a lot of playing time over at Utah, but that's going to be a help with losing a guy like a Christian Meeks, who's going to be staying within the conference over at NC Central. You've got a guy in Trey Pettigrew, who began his career over at Nevada and Eastern Michigan. Really didn't see a lot of playing time at the Division I ranks, but at junior college level for Johnson C. Smith, he was a stat sheet sufferer, 17 points, right around about 3 assists, shot 37.5% for 3. Keith Richards was a part-time starter over at Cal State Fullerton. There's upside here, in my opinion, for this Morgan State team. And I mean, John Awoke, he was averaging 7 points, 3 boards, shot in the mid-30s from 3 over at Wagner. I think Morgan State is starting to put something together. I think that they're knocking at the door of being a team that year in and year out is going to be in the top 4, top 5 of this conference, like what Kevin Broadus is doing. So give me Morgan State here in my projector of finish for the MEAC here at number 4. Number 3, my projector finish for the MEAC, I'm going to be going South Carolina State. For South Carolina State, it has not been great to say the least. They've got some of the least resources in all of college basketball, but it's looking like they're going to be getting a lot of guys back from a season ago. Now, they have yet to release their roster for the 2026-27 season, but a lot of these guys that could have jumped ship, they did not. It's looking like they should be getting Noah Treadwell back, and that's going to be a key for this team. He was shooting about 35.5% from 3. South Carolina State, one of the the few teams within the conference that was halfway decent with their three-point shooting last year. They should be banking on Christopher Parker as well, a guy that was able to average 7 points and about 5 rebounds per game last season, assuming they get him back. You've got a 7'1" lottery ticket in Tim Okoje. He was stuck on the bench last season, but there's a chance that he's going to be able to give this team a little bit of something. And then they bring in the Mercyhurst transfer and Deshaun Jackson, Deshaun Jackson was able to average about 6 points, 3 boards, 3 assists, nice stat sheet stuffer. He might be one of the more impactful transfers, not going to Howard in this conference. Also Norfolk State, you're going to hear them a little bit later on, but I do think that South Carolina State starting to be able to figure things out. A few seasons ago, they had to turn over the coaching staff because they ended up losing their guy, and Eric Martin has done a good job in terms of being able to elevate the team. They were actually number 1 in the MEAC during the regular season a few seasons ago. He's done a great job taking the torch from Tony Badlock. So with South Carolina State in my projector of finish, I've got them at number 3. Number 2 in my projector of finish, I'm going to be going Norfolk State. With Norfolk State, it's a bunch that just year in and year out, you can expect steadiness from Robert Jones. Even though Robert Jones is going to be losing so many of his guys from a season ago, this is one of the few teams in the conference that's going to spend a little bit of money. They're going to bring in some guys. Like, I like the fact that they bring in Ja'Kai Gupton. Gupton is someone that comes in from St. Peter's. He was a relatively solid forward over there. He's going to help this team out down low, as this is always year in and year out one of the better rebounding teams in the conference. Gupton, about 8 points, 5 rebounds per game. J.C. Riley is a guy that was over at Northwestern State as a 6'10" big man. Only got about 2.5 rebounds per game last season, but I think that there's a chance that he dominates this conference. Braden Gardner, he was able to give you about 4 points, 3 rebounds per game as well. And then they are looking for a little bit of an X factor and a kicker from three-point range. Adrian Newton, he had 4 points per game and he shot 47.8% from three-point range, so that's going to be big for this team. You've got Drame Kamara along with Ahmad Torrens, who is really stuck in the shadow of some of those guards from a season ago. They're going to be seeing some elevated play time, unless if you get like Elijah Jameson or something like that to have a court case or something like that, which I don't think is going to be happening, but you never know in this day and age of college basketball. Lots of turnover here for Norfolk State. I trust in this coaching staff to be able to have this team towards the top of the conference, and I think that the transfers make an impact right away. So number 2, my projector or finish for the MEAC, I'm going to be going with Norfolk State. And at number 1 in my projector or finish for the MEAC, this one is not close. It's Howard. They were 13th in the country in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis on defense, 20th in overall points allowed on a per possession basis. They gave Michigan an okay game in the NCAA tournament, for goodness sakes. Heck, Arizona didn't give them as good of a game as Howard did. Now, I don't think Howard is as good as Arizona this year. I'm sorry, Howard fans. But that said, what Kenneth Blakeney has been able to do with this Howard team has been absolutely superb. Now, they're going to be losing Bryce Harris from a season ago. He was by far the best player in this conference. No offense or buts about it, but they should be returning Cam Gillis, a guy that was able to give you like 9 or 10 points per game, a guy that began his career in the Patriot League. So I do think that there's quite a bit of upside there. Alex Cotton was a nice scorer from last season's team as well. I think that Drew Harris, a freshman, is going to be able to step up, give you some good minutes. And then they brought in a few guys I really like the Fresno State transfer and Gasper Kovisar. He's a guy that's saying 6'10". Really didn't see a ton of playing time over at Fresno State, but in this conference, he should be able to go out there, dominate right away. You've got James Brown as well, 6'10" big man that was a former top 250 recruit over at North Carolina. Didn't see a lot of minutes over at North Carolina, but you know what? He's going to be able to find a role here. And then they're bringing back Cedric Taylor. Cedric Taylor, he was almost on par with Bryce Harris when he was out there, because Cedric Taylor was missing for the first, I would like to say, 10 or 11 games last season. When he came back, 17 points, 6 boards, a steal, a block per contest. Not the world's greatest three-point shooter. That's what he lacks that Harris had last year. But he's a guy that's going to be able to run the show this year for this team. He's going to be superb. You've got Gillis, who's able to dole out the ball. This team is by far the number 1 team in the conference. If you're looking at the biggest lopsidedness between 1 and 2 within the conference, I would say that Howard, from them being number 1 and Norfolk State being number 2, on par with the likes of a High Point, who is by far number 1 out there in the Big South. So I think that Howard, head and shoulders, your number 1 team in terms of the MEAC, and I've got them in my projector finish at numero 1. And that'll wrap things up for the MEAC Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Big thanks to Herbert Seward, does such great work over at HBCU Weekly. He does a great job taking a look at this great game of college basketball over at Fansided, Mid-Major Madness, and so much more. He joined me in the last segment. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, go Coast to Coast Hoops. You're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is by Twitter/X timeline at gunit_D1. Keep in mind, letters CM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Again, with regards to all these court cases, I'm going to be continuing to take a look at that day in and day out. We're going to continue to get these great conference previews as I'm able to do them because, again, rosters might be changing with regards to these court cases and guys getting eligibility, but we'll keep you guys in the loop there. My goal is to make this the greatest college basketball season of all time, so I'm coming at you guys every single day, and I'll be back with you once you get them out. Thank you.